Hello everyone and welcome to FERMA Talks, whether you're watching us wherever you are at home or in your office, or if you're live with us here in the studio in Brussels. We're delighted to have you with us today. From risk to resilience, learning how to deal with disruption, that'll be the theme for the discussions over these 2 days. My name is Alex Taylor. I'm a European journalist. I'm delighted to be your host for these discussions. I've hosted quite a few things for FERMA, so it's nice to see some of you again. The pandemic, we've all had to deal with a very peculiar situation over the last 2 years. Obviously, the pandemic has catapulted risk management into the spotlight. During these next 2 days, we will be looking at the various sides of risk management and how it can help build organizational resilience. So we actually want to look at the problems, but to move the conversation on and see how we can better organize in the future. So that there will be some interesting panel discussions. You're welcome to leave your comments. We will also be having one-to-one interviews with some prestigious guests. So we're talking about the state of the insurance market in general and where we go from here. It'll be today and tomorrow. Each session will be in the morning up until midday, then the afternoon from 2 to 3:30 Central European time as here in Brussels. So to start the talks, hello, welcome. I'd like to ask some questions to Dirk Wegener, you're the president of FERMA, and to the FERMA vice president, Charlotte Hanke, who is chairman of the program for this event and the FERMA Forum for next year. I'm going to start with you, Charlotte. If there's one strong memory that you have kept from this pandemic year, what would it be?
Well, my strongest memory is how fast almost every company and organization globally acknowledged the need for contingency plans and mitigation actions, or simply just to have a plan B. Even on a smaller scale, down to a household level, we all had to deal and to have to respond to the pandemic. So we all had to cope with this series of restrictions in our companies and in our personal lives.
What would you say would be the key lesson that we've learned from this?
Well, my key learning is really how important it is to be prepared for a crisis and how important it is for companies to be robust and have capacity to respond fast and decisively. As part of my function in SAP as risk manager, I've also been the crisis management champion for several years. So in this role, I really learned how to get hands-on experience. As part of our global crisis management policy, we have been doing tabletop exercises for so many years, and now, finally, I was dealing with this together with the local management team. So it was beneficial to see how important it is to practice and rehearse. And I was also proud to see how fast our company could come up and set up a global pandemic task force building on this existing and well-established crisis management framework.
Okay, thank you. Dirk, the same question to you. What a memory and a lesson to be learned?
Yeah, maybe first of all, hello and welcome to all. Thanks for joining us. I think my strongest memory is when we were all at home during the first lockdown. I had to share the internet connection with my daughters who are doing homeschooling, and I, of course, wasn't at home office. And this internet connection was from time to time pretty poor. So there was a chance by restarting the modem in the basement to get a better connection, which, of course, this caused a disruption to all of us. So we imposed the rule that you are only allowed to do that, to ask the others before you actually restart the modem. So it became a daily routine that someone knocked at your door and saying, "Can I restart the modem now?" So the lessons to be learned is actually get a proper IT equipment even at your home to prepare for such an event.
Right, well, the theme, as I said, of this event is from risk to resilience, and FERMA has just published a report which I think you did in collaboration with McKinsey on the risk manager's contribution to corporate resilience. Charlotte, what did we actually learn from this survey?
Yeah, we are very pleased now to have some key data points to discuss on resilience. So I would like to mention 2 key findings. Firstly, that the results shows that this coronavirus pandemic accelerated the push for corporate resilience, but in varying sectors and various degrees of resilient pillars. So, for instance, managing business and the supply chain emerged as key vulnerabilities during the pandemic. Over a quarter of the respondents already made changes to their supply chains, which is a continuing process. But as one risk manager actually stated, previously her company only focused on financial aspects of the supply chain. And now this company has adopted a holistic view, looking at geographic footprint, compliance issues, and a series of other factors.
What did the survey actually show regarding the profile of risk management? Can you tell us about that?
Absolutely, because it shows also that it has raised the profile of European risk and insurance management. Most of the participants also identified the executive team and the risk function as chiefly responsible for resilience and related coordination within their companies. But this finding also suggests that the risk function is taking a greater responsibility now in managing risks more holistically, especially in coordination with other functions across the organizations. But while the majority of respondents feel that their organizations are well equipped to manage resilience, the results also shows that more work is needed to make this a truly strategic priority.
And where do you think the work is still to be done? What has to come?
Well, I think to mention maybe three areas. First of all, 3/4 of the risk managers who responded, they really state that there's a clear need for improving risk culture and integrating resilience more strongly in the strategy process of their organizations. So it may very well be that that the pandemic has highlighted this importance of good resilience. But we must not be complacent. There is still a lot to be done. We continue to face other potential risks, for example, climate change or cyber risks. So therefore, we really need to embed the risk culture in the organizations, so we are prepared for future disruptions, whatever the cause.
What are the other points?
Well, this really shows also resilience should be part of the strategic considerations and the strategy process, so we can have a quick and agile response to changing circumstances. As an example, I can mention that at SAP, remote operations across all functions in the company have been a reality for many years, and our automated processes and technologies allowed us to come as close to a virtual organization as we can possibly get. But keeping the business running with help of resilient processes is just one part of the equation. Now, it's also important that we also look at our employees' personal resilience, especially now that we need to adapt to new working structures or new working models.
Absolutely, it's changed things for everybody.
Yeah, and then finally, it seems that there is still room to improvement around capabilities to predict events, conduct scenario analysis, and stress test to assess potential outcomes. 25% of the respondents say that they have no foresight capabilities currently in place. This has a cost, but compared to the outcome, the return on investment is excellent.
Okay, and Dirk, how do you see FERMA contributing to the resilience of its members?
Yeah, so during the pandemic, FERMA surveyed the COVID-19 impact on risk management. And only 5% of the respondees had business interruption cover for such an event. So we started to advocate for the creation of a public-private partnership at EU level to create the resilience framework, which builds on risk management, and as a second layer, the expertise and in risk transfer of the private insurance sector. Backed by a public-funded pool of ultimately achieve a fairer risk-based allocation of taxpayers' monies, ideally for all catastrophe and systemic risks. Secondly, as we have learned from the resilience report, collaboration is key across all functions, internally and externally. FERMA is supporting this process by working with other organizations like ECIIA and ECODA, with which we are working on a joint project on sustainability risk oversight to improve the interaction between the board's risk management and internal audit. Finally, we decided to strengthen the voice of the European corporate insurance buyers Insurance has been and shall be an important source of financial resilience. Right now, unfortunately, we see that at times, while companies have of increasing exposures, capacity are reduced and premiums are increasing at times when companies have to work with tight budget as they recover from the pandemic. So as the insurance market is going beyond national boundaries, we see a role for FERMA as a European association to have a dialogue with the insurers to talk about these issues.
Okay, well, let me ask you to imagine if I gave you a magic wand. Let's just imagine somebody very important from the European Commission might possibly be hearing what you say. What would be your wish list? It's now or never to say what you need. How could the European Commission help risk management?
Of course, we appreciate this opportunity to do that. I think we need more anticipation and preparation for the next crisis, be it natural catastrophes, be it cyber, or the next health emergency event again. The emphasis should be on prevention rather than on post-crisis response. So, i.e., the legislation should incentivize organizations that embed risk management in their business models and governance structure. So the public-private partnership and the catastrophe resilience framework, as suggested by FERMA, not just reduces the impact of an event, but also reduces considerably the economic damage because of the embedded risk management. We would also like to see the Commission consider risk management as an important aspect of new proposals like sustainability and digitalization. We aim to support this by building on our position as the leading voice of the risk and insurance managers in Europe. We are therefore delighted to have the participation of members of the European Commission and the European Parliament in our event here.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that they will listen to with great attention. Thank you very much to both of you. It's now my pleasure to ask to express himself after he has heard that wish list. We're delighted to have with us the European Commission Vice President Maroš Šefčovič.
Thank you very much, Alex, and first and foremost, thank to all the FERMA team for not only organizing this event, but also thinking about the European Commission and sending the kind invitation to me. And I really appreciate, and it's indeed the pleasure to indeed have the possible of this first exchange for myself with the European risk managers. As you know, back in 2019, I became the first ever European Commissioner to be given a specific responsibility for strategic foresight. So as I used to say, the President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, have a good foresight to do that because we see, and for me it was just clear confirmation by previous speakers, how the life and the world became much more complicated and much more challenging since the COVID-19 crisis has started all over the world. And I think that if you look at or on the areas of possible cooperation, indeed, there have to be close interconnection with your responsibility as risk managers and our responsibility as public servants in the European Commission. Because what we are trying to do is actually the same. We want to identify the risks and prepare for the best possible way for the next shock or crisis which might be headed our way. So I'm absolutely convinced that as a public institution, we have taken up the challenge to embed the strategic foresight into our policy making, but at the same time, we know that we have a lot to learn from you, from the private risk managers, as well as from insurance companies. If you allow me, I'd just like to start to delve a little bit more into depth by, I would say, first very important area. This is horizon scanning. I think here both policymakers and businesses need to constantly keep our eyes open for what's coming. It's about improving situational awareness to be able to spot already the early signs of the change which would affect our risk landscape or our resilience options. So to have the ability to peek over the horizon, to look around the corner and to really exchange the information in real time possibilities, that's something what we need. And I can also share with you that it's one of the major challenges we are facing also in the European Commission. We receive wealth of information, but to filter out, to focus on what is really, really important, what has political importance, relevance, let's make the foresight and horizon scanning strategic. And I think that was what also the President of the Commission touched upon in her recent State of the Union speech when she was calling for the EU to consider our own joint situational awareness center. I know that the horizon scanning is actually something which you, the private sector, is using a lot to support identification of short-term risk, to feed the analysis of long-term risk. And indeed, I think it's at the heart of what you do to succeed in the market. So I think your companies really owe a lot, not only to the risk managers, but also to your ability to scan the horizon, what there might be good or bad for your companies. And here we have to learn from you. And my goal is actually to make sure that we would establish fully fledged horizon scanning capacity in the Commission. We are already working very well with all other institutions. We create common framework, which we call ESPAS. And you probably heard that last year we managed to establish the network on the governmental level. We call it Ministers of Future Network, where we are dealing with these issues. And I'm very glad to say that I see more and more governments, more and more prime ministers to invest more and more results into horizon scanning capabilities in their foresight units, which are working very close to the prime minister. If it comes to the distinction between the types of risk, I think, and we heard it also from the previous speaker, there is more and more of the blur situation where we are faced with a hybrid crisis, where the horizon scanning and strategic foresight would be the key to increase our resilience. And that was actually the idea behind the first strategic foresight report we presented last year. It was on resilience, and I think rightly so, because we discovered that if we want to build Europe, which would be not only greener or more digital, it has to be first and foremost more resilient. And therefore, we very much focus on what it means from the perspective of green, digital, socioeconomic, and geopolitical for the European Union. This year report, which we presented just a couple of weeks ago, was kind of extrapolation of the resilience report of the last year. We very much focused on open strategic autonomy, what it means for Europe to be more resilient in this new geopolitical situation, and what we need to be able to exercise the global leadership also in the next decade. And we identified 10 areas of action which would allow us to boost the European strategic autonomy. And these areas go from the area of health, food, down to decarbonized and affordable energy, through the topic which you discussed already in the previous panel. This is about digitalization, about artificial intelligence, how to better manage and protect the data, but also issues of security and defense, which I think came very much to the forefront with the drama which was unfolding on our screens and coming from Kabul, down to the more resilience of the public institutions and democracy as such. And I would highlight particularly the action number 6, which points to the importance of building resilient and future-proof economic and financial systems. And this would have to play a crucial role, because if you are looking at the green transition, it's quite obvious that we would need a lot of investment into that area. Our assessment is that we are talking about 470 billion euros in additional investment per year to reach our climate and environmental targets. And this would require huge mobilization of the private capital, and therefore we very much welcome the fact that not only public but more and more private institutional and retail investors are showing growing interest in sustainable investment, because they see that it pays back. It's a good investment and actually brings a very positive results. What I think it's very important to touch upon today is also the fact that climate change and environmental degradation, that they have direct effect and impact on financial stability. And if we look at the last summer, the devastating fires, the floods, the overall impact on energy prices, because we just simply needed more energy in the cold springs to heat, and in the hot summer to cool our offices, our houses and households. So we see how the climate change is directly translated into the financial consequences and into the direct impact on our economy. And what is, of course, very important to underline in this forum is the fact that only 30% of all economic losses are currently insured, leaving a 70% of climate insurance gap. And that's, I would say, the massive question which we would need to tackle. And therefore, the EU financial system thus would need to systematically integrate into the financial decision-making sustainability risks and impacts, long-term risk management, and disaster risk financing strategies. I'm sure that you know very well our recent proposals to revise Solvency II, the EU rules for the insurance sector, which explicitly aims to respond to this need. And we will also consider how to increase preparedness for and resilience to pandemic and similar events, including via the use of foresight capacity. We will also work on how to raise awareness and coverage of pandemic-related risk to insurance contracts, as well as the resilience of the economy to large-scale event. This means assessing the ability of insurance sectors to supply enhanced cover against pandemic-related risk, but it also means using foresight capacities to build a good understanding of the needs of business when it comes to insurance products in the post-pandemic environment. Speaking of resilience, let me now conclude with a few words on resilience dashboards. Here I'm not sure you heard about it, but I would very much recommend you would have a look at our website, where we actually published, after quite lengthy and detailed discussions with our member states, resilience dashboards for all EU member states, and also the comparison with our major partners and global competitors. We believe that these dashboards could be a new tool to monitor resilience, and we also want to use it as a tool for the possible ex-post evaluation of the effectiveness, how our resilience policies and recovery strategies have actually worked. And you know that we are going to invest through the European recovery plans almost 800 billion of euros within the next couple of years, and therefore we want to make sure that it goes into the right direction for the right priorities, and that, of course, we would have a good tools to assess the effectiveness, how this money been used. Why this is interesting for your discussion to date? Because we linked the resilience dashboards with some of the things which you are going to discuss today. There are, of course, many variables in our resilience dashboards, but I would mention just 3 groups of them. One, which is very much focused on the social and economic dimension, and it covers the overall capitalization of the insurance sector. In the green dimension, we have 2 categories which are covering number of fatalities and insured losses from climate extremes. And if it comes to cybersecurity, which I'm sure will be one of the topics you are going to cover today, there we have actually 4 variables which we are monitoring, and this is ICT security, incidents experienced by the firms, cybersecurity incidents occurring to the people, cybersecurity awareness, and the global cybersecurity index. So to conclude, I just would like to reiterate that our work on building the resilience of our economy and society must be in its nature our joint effort. So I am delighted to have a possibility to participate in your event, to share with you my views, and of course to learn from the risk managers of Europe, because I think we really need to work with your knowledge also in public institutions like in the European Commission. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Vice President, for setting the scene for us. If you're kind enough to say, I think we have a few questions for you. I'm sure you would be eager to reply to some questions in the hall. Yes, Dirk.
Yeah, many thanks, Vice President Šefčovič, for taking the time and to meet with us despite your of course, busy agenda. Honestly, I don't think that I do have a question because I think we are already pretty much aligned. So we as FERMA developed a risk resilience scheme which ultimately in form of a public-private partnership should also embed the capabilities of the private insurance sector. We worked with this one intensively with EIOPA, and they also issued a paper describing pretty much the same idea and philosophies, which then went to the European Commission for further review. So I think FERMA stays ready to support the European Commission to working on this matter to ultimately increase the resilience of the European economies. So I think that you are sharing the same vision and goals is of course very much appreciated. So again, thanks very much for being our guest today and for your interesting insights on what the European Commission is doing on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Just a quick response here. Thank you very much for the kind invitation and the kind words. Indeed, I think we are all kind of roaming into the new era, not only because of the pandemic, the climate change, but also because foresight is something between the art and science, and we need to find the right, I would say, level and right proportion of which one prevails in our foresighting and in our forecasting. At the same time, when I was looking closer to your business and the great work you do, I think we are also kind of crossing the threshold, what was, I would say, such a traditional division, that if it comes to the private interest, it's a matter for the insurance. If it comes to the public risk, so it's a matter of state. But we never had it before that the state actually might be behind attacking the private company, or we never had it also that the private company might be behind attacking some critical infrastructure of the state. So I think we see that how these things are getting blurred. And of course, if we are talking about the climate change and the severe weather events, private house is a private house, but at the same time, it's also the public responsibility to mitigate the climate change and prepare the country, the continent, in our case, the Europe, better for what might come in the future. So what would be very important is to have this fresh look, to look at it, I would say, in these new optics. And I can also reassure you that my colleagues, Executive Vice President Dombrovskis, Commissioner McGuinness, they are very much working on the same approach as I have. And if I may suggest something for the future, I think it would be good, as you, Mr. President, had proposed, to have regular contact, to have ongoing dialogue, and to really help us to improve our horizon scanning capacities, to work together on what could be the better foresight for Europe in any area, so we can prepare ourselves better, and we can use these actually very modern anticipatory governance techniques, because I can tell you that the Prime Ministers are very interested, and we should use that window of opportunity of the interest to actually feed them the good information, so the public institutions, the governments can actually adopt good decisions for the future. So once again, thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we have, if you have time, one more question. If you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, Gaëtan Lefebvre, board member of FERMA. Mr. Vice President, what about supply chain? What is your positions with regard to ensuring more resilience in EU supply chains? How EU can support this process?
Yeah, if it comes to the supply chains, I think the COVID-19 was indeed a huge wake-up call for all of us. I think COVID-19 got a lot of adjectives. I mean, the political sciences called the COVID-19 big accelerator. We saw it with the digitalization, with how we all been suddenly pushed from one day into another to the online space, not only for work, but also, as it was very nicely described, very much like your analogy with the kids in school, but also the great divider that we never have seen such a, I would say, bitter exchanges of opinions on first, will we have enough vaccinations? Once we have them, should we get vaccinated? What is the I would say the proportion, how the countries which are producing the vaccines to help the other countries which do not have it. And we saw this unbelievable tension being built across the societies, countries, but also continents. And if it comes to the supply chains, it was such a bitter awakening that if it comes to very key health materials, that we just don't produce it anymore in Europe, that we had to, run across the world to look for the face mask. We discovered that almost all paracetamol for Europe is made in India, and I can give you a lot of examples, and I think until today, we are kind of struggling with lack of chips, lack of certain components for our industry in Europe, and therefore what we did based on the resilience report which we published the last year was that we did very thorough assessment of all the products we are importing to the European Union. So it's, for your information, it was around 5,600 products, and we categorized them where we are more dependent, where less. In more than 100, I think 40 categories, we can say that we are very much dependent. In 6, we are totally dependent. And you will not be surprised that most of these categories are covering raw materials or the products which are very closely linked with the raw materials. And if I look at it from the perspective which I presented to my colleagues in the Commission, all technologies of the future, be it supercomputers, drones, be it all the modern energy technologies are very much based on the critical raw materials where the dominant position is today played in China. So to have a parallel between our fossil dependencies in Russia and critical raw materials in China, it's, I think, very, very fit. And therefore, we adopted, and this is concrete response to your question, a special, in this case, raw materials strategy where we listed the 30 most needed raw materials for European Union. As an anecdote, I would mention that the last list from 4 years ago even didn't have the lithium among the top 30 critical raw materials we needed. So it just shows how the world is changing, and there we have concrete steps how to be more self-sufficient, what we can prospect within the Europe, and what we need to get from other countries and how to deal with that. And we have the same strategies for all bottlenecks in our supply chains, just to make sure that we would avoid the situations as we had during the COVID crisis, that once the planes are not flying, ships are not sailing, borders are closed, then we have big problems, and simply there are these key ingredients, key raw materials, and key products which we must be able to produce here in Europe, just simply to have our autonomy and freedom to act.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, we can applaud here in the studio. Thank you very much indeed, Vice President, and good luck with my ex-compatriots on Brexit, if I may say so.
Thank you very much. It would be very tough
indeed.
Week for us, I can tell you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much once again, and all the best.
Thank you for coming. So we're now going on to our very first roundtable, how to collaborate for resilience. So there we are. It's time to welcome the guests for our first roundtable, how to work better for resilience, to pull all the threads together that we've been talking about already this morning. I'm delighted to have some experts with us this morning. Can I first of all say that Sandrine Gilshin, the Chief Human Resources Officer for AXA, unfortunately won't be able to join us today for a last-minute reason. She apologises, but I'm delighted to have with us Pim Moorman. Pim, goeiedag. You are part of Royal Philips Insurance and Risk Management Department, and you're responsible for managing various global insurance lines, such as property damage and business interruption, as well as cyber. It's very nice to have you. Stéphane Lenko, bonjour, bienvenue. You are passionate about aerospace and cybersecurity. As a convinced European, you've been a member of the ENISA, the European Union Agency for Cyber Security, permanent stakeholder group for the 2017 to 2020 tenure, and you're the Thales Group CISO you've been with since early 2019. Sandra Gobert, bonjour, hello, goeiedag. You're the Executive Director of Guberna, which is the Belgian Institute of Directors. You've been that since January 2019. I think you're an entrepreneur at heart, and you've been involved in the creation of several businesses, and you've held executive and non-executive mandates in various sectors, so we're delighted to have your expertise. And last but not least, John Bendermacher, you are the Chief Audit Executive of Euroclear Group, which is a Belgian-based financial services company specializing in the settlement of securities transactions, as well as the safekeeping and asset servicing of these securities. So an expert panel. I'd like to ask you a kind of introductory question so that you make a kind of introductory statement, and then afterwards I'll ask you to have a debate about the themes that you have evolved. First of all, I'm going to start with Sandra. If you could tell us how boards and directors support an optimal combination of, on one hand, risk and resilience, the two themes that have brought us here together today.
Of course, very gladly. Thank you. First of all, I want to congratulate you with the theme of our discussion, Collaborate for Resilience, because collaboration is really key to go from risk to resilience. And so that is also the fact for the role of the board of directors. Because according to research, to move from risk to resilience, you need to work on 3 levels. And these levels are, of course, structures and processes. As various other speakers already highlighted, it's very important to have adequate risk management, contingency plans, scenario planning, etc. But this is not sufficient, because this is sufficient for the risk, but it's not sufficient for the resilience, because resilience needs also vision. Vision is seeing what the others don't see, seeing the invisible. And there you need the board, the steering committee, the steering body of the organization that is not engaged in the daily operations and that has the necessary helicopter view to develop this vision. Of course, this is a tremendous challenge for boards. Maybe I come back to that later, because it needs specific capabilities. And then the third thing you need, and where the board comes in and is really key, is leadership, because resilience is really about creating awareness, but also about enhancing commitment and nurturing creativity. So there also the role of the board of directors is really very important.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Those introductory ideas. I'm sure we'll be coming back to them. You can all have a chance to react. Pim, I'd like to hear from you. You were awarded the Collaboration of the Year by FERMA last year because of the integrated approach on resiliency, where multiple departments within Philips work together on the same platform, sharing both data and insights. Tell us a little bit how that approach helped Philips during what was, by all accounts, a very, very, very difficult year.
Yeah, we actually started let's say the platform back in end of 2017, 2018. Visibility is a keyword in resiliency, so I take that from Sandra as well. So we actually had the vision of collaborating in a single platform, so we could actually push standardized data in there, and then in the meantime, over those last 3-4 years, we actually have now 7 different domains on that platform, sharing data and adding all our own information to that platform as well. So we can create more visibility from supplier risk to pushing stuff to insurance departments, but also working with our insurers on that platform. So while we collaborated on that platform over the last couple of years, when COVID hit us, we were actually in the 2nd week, 3rd week of January live with a small task force pointing out, okay, you know, those suppliers could be hit in the China area and which products might be impacted. We use the platform also for our entities actually to do their business continuity management in the platform. So we would have bottom-up information, but also top-down, we would feed our entities with relevant information for them. So we all guinea pig of that platform, which we'll see probably 10 domains working on it next year. I think that's also the future, that we work on standardized data, so you can do relationship mapping, which creates visibility again. And the only way you can do it is through collaboration.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that introduction. Let's move on to Stefan Lenko. Your speciality is cybersecurity. Obviously, been a great growing concern. We look at Davos, for example, the World Economic Forum, where they talked about it a lot, and also in general population. CISO, is this a new role and it's evolving? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think resilience is a good topic to be CISOs these days. You need quite some resilience as a person, but it started off pretty much as a single-person job in a cave somewhere, taking care about antivirus and firewalls. And as we grow into being more digital in companies, and the COVID actually accelerated this digital transformation, we're now into a position where we are more risk advisors to the board in terms of what's coming, which is the strategic view that we should be having against those cyber risks. And that takes us into companies are all about taking risks. Ultimately, the point is really how resilient you can be versus those risks, what you want to do about them, whether you want to prepare for them or actually accept them and rely on insurance to cover for any loss that you may have. And I think that's the big shift that we're having with cyber becoming one of the top 2 risks that we're seeing probably in the coming future, as we could hear earlier. It is a team sport now. I think that's what it shows. We have a wonderful panel here. We are talking about risk management, board of directors, HR unfortunately not here. But most definitely, you cannot work through resilience without the expertise of some people and without that visibility, that long-standing view. And I think that's where CISOs are ultimately about preparedness and getting the right vision for the future.
You say it's a team sport. Are you saying it wasn't a team sport before?
I think that, quite frankly, it used to be seen as the person you don't understand somewhere, and that's where also it gets interesting when you talk through crisis management teams and exercises, hopefully when it's not real crisis. And the board, ultimately you want to be understood because the whole point is passing the ball. What's the goal for your company? As Thales, for instance, our resilience was based on the multiplicity of our business lines. That's how we went through crisis. For Airbus, which was my previous company, that is a whole different matter. You need to understand this. You need, as a CISO, you need to understand what's the goal of the company, to understand and play ball with the board of directors, with the risk management, with every other function, including audit. That's part of a multi-layered defense line.
Thales is a very good example of that, because I've hosted quite a few things for Thales, and I know your multiple activities. John Benderbacher, as an internal auditor, what would you say your main learnings have been from this very strange year that we've all been through with COVID in terms of personal and business lives?
Yeah, well, first of all, I should thank you for the advertising Euroclear. But to be fair, I'm probably here because I'm board member of the ECIIA, and that's why FERMA invited us, and we work together with FERMA a lot, so thank you for that. The learnings from COVID, there are a few, and the first one is also important for this audience, because the cooperation between the 3 lines has been proven, basically imperative for success of working in this crisis. Second thing I would like to say is that what we learned is also that in the rehearsals we do for handling crises, we should take outsourced services into that, mainly the offshore services, for instance, in India, I think we were lucky to get enough laptops there to make sure they could maintain their work as well. Another thing is also that in a crisis with this duration, it's very hard to see what the moment is that you move from crisis back to business as usual. Because at some point, we were having crisis meetings and looking at the COVID illness numbers, but that was not the problem anymore. It was more how are we working together, and that's kind of business as usual. Another thing from the internal audit angle, I think it makes sense to do audits even during the crisis. When the crisis is so long as this one, it makes sense to have an independent view on how crisis management is going, but also on controls that are changing to make sure that they are sufficiently designed and operating effectively. And the last point is also that I learned that we were lucky as well, because WebEx and Teams were ready for us. And also our staff has shown enormous resilience in teleworking. And I think that's also a little bit of luck.
Just one question based on what you've just said. You say that we're moving back to business as usual. Are we back to business as usual? What stage are we at? Does anybody want to take that on? I think it's a... I mean, we're talking about resilience and risk. To what extent?
It depends on the region as well, right? So.
Yeah, I think, are we just talking about COVID? Because I have the feeling that COVID was just like a dry run for what is ahead of us. So I'm not totally agreeing with being back to business as usual. So I think this has to be nuanced.
No, and I didn't want to say that we are back in business as usual, because usual was something else than we are in right now. But in managing the crisis, you get a point in which it's not a crisis organization that's handling, but management should start handling it itself again. That's what I meant.
I agree. I think not to corner the term new normal, but obviously COVID has changed the way that we do business. It has accelerated a great deal of what was coming, and that was part of the problem. But I agree completely with you. At some point there is, and that's part of the strategic vision you need to be having with the board, there's a moment where you need to move away from a crisis management into something that's the after crisis. So are we back to normal? I'm not quite sure, but we're certainly past the point where it's an absolute crisis where you meet very regularly.
It's nice also to be actually meeting real people and having a discussion instead of everybody seeing each other over screens. I noticed, Sandra, that you talked about leadership. I don't always ask you all the questions, so please feel free to chip in. How can an organization instill resilient leadership? What are the lessons to be learned, and how is it possible to make sure that the leadership, the people who are going to inspire different companies are resilient? Sandra.
So, of course, from our point of view, this is a major task for the board of directors. And it's the board of directors that is appointing the management and that is setting the KPIs for the management. So this is very important. But it starts with the board itself. And that was one of the tremendous challenges, I think, during COVID, that we have seen that boards were not prepared for this crisis. The composition of the board was not ready to go and to handle this crisis.
But was anybody prepared for this crisis? I mean,
no, but are we? I would even go one step further. Are we prepared for the next crisis? Because we're still talking about COVID, but now we're before this tremendous energy crisis, and no one mentioned it this morning until now. I mean, so we're still not prepared. So I think we should really start with working on the board of directors and have experts on the board, people with capabilities. This board of directors has to set a management also with resilience capabilities, and then the management has to get this culture throughout the organization. So it's a huge task that is before us, really to move from risk, we're still talking risk, to really resilient organizations ready for the future.
What are the obstacles to actually doing this, though? Because it seems obvious that the actual situation that we've all gone through should spur people on to. What are the obstacles to change?
You can't possibly plan for every dark scenario ahead of you, and resilience has a cost. Ultimately, moving from risk to resilience means also that you can identify what's your risk landscape and which are the risks that you want to invest on in order to be resilient. So there's a lot about awareness, to answer your original question, Alex. There's a lot about awareness about the topic. There's a lot about understanding and to understand which risks you're willing to tackle. Having the same language, having your battle plans ready, and I'm a big fan of Patton's alleged quote around "no plan survives contact with the enemy." You need to have your plans ready, but you actually do believe in the planning that you've made before, rather than anything else. And I think that's what we need to be doing if we want to prepare for whatever comes next. Having the plans and knowing that it will probably be very different from what we expect.
A word on leadership from either of you? Pim.
Yeah, so I think on the leadership, we had full support during the COVID crisis. We also have, our top 20 risks when Philips defined. So I think all the instances mentioned here, climate change, energy, will be on that list. But there are still certain unknowns that you cannot prepare for. So I'm also a believer of collaboration to perhaps capture 80% of the known. But there will always be a certain unknown.
What kind of collaboration? What do you mean exactly?
Well, it means that you need to collaborate between the departments. You cannot work in isolation anymore. So you need to work with your internal teams, but also with external teams. We just, before this meeting, we just spoke about resiliency with our suppliers. So although you may, as a company, be well prepared, we still, we still both produce goods. You also have these smaller pop-and-mom shops providing components to you from China or any other region. And you also need to support them in their resiliency. So it's not, just your company is not enough anymore. You need to look at the external world and those stakeholders out there as well.
John, something about leadership?
Yeah, well, I think general leadership, like Sandra is saying, has become more aware during this crisis about the importance to be prepared. And I think that will help for the topics that will come to us soon. I think the crisis management itself, there you have to have leadership that can move fast and does not lose time looking too much at how the governance should work and how much procedures are there that are worrying maybe the pace. So there you need very pragmatic people.
You were talking about China. Just a question that occurs to me listening to you all. It's all very well talking about leadership, but we're here as Europeans. There are some things which are totally out of our control, whether you have good leadership or not. I mean, the situation in China, supply chains, was unpredictable, as you said, and we're having to deal with it. So a good leader or bad leader doesn't make that much difference in a way, does it? Because the situation is unpredictable.
Well, it's also how you deal with the situation. So we had some suppliers in India, for example, who were locked down, could not operate, were chased home basically by police. So we had to, through our governmental affairs groups, work with the local government to reopen some shops, because otherwise the world would not see ventilators, for example. So I think some elements you can influence, and I think it's up to the crisis teams to actually take those and then put those into action.
Would it be true to say that stakeholders are demanding more and more information about the resilience of organizations? Because obviously we're all wondering what's going to happen over the next few months and the next few years. The world has changed dramatically. To what extent does the pressure come from stakeholders themselves?
Yeah, I think if I look at our industry, which is the health tech industry, healthcare, so we, for example, see initiatives from customers looking at our resiliency as a company. So we would have the healthcare industry resilience collaborative, and customers unite and want to see that their suppliers, which is companies like ours, how resilient we are as a company. So then just a business continuity plan is not enough. So you have to put a little bit more meat on the bone to actually show that you work on your resiliency. But I think the primary reason for being resilient is your motivation as a company to withstand headwinds.
A little bit more meat on the bone? Is that what Telles has?
Yeah, I think the reason for being of the company is what drives everyone, most definitely. And ultimately, we're there to deliver something to our customers, some values, and the way that we need to prove the resilience. It's not something that you claim and earn people's respect. You need to prove that it delivers. Why are people asking about resilience? Because we need to consistently deliver whatever we're making or engineering or supporting. And that's why the pressure is coming from. how confident are you that you can deliver this or that product in due course, whereas your people are locked down, for instance? That was a question that was raised during the pandemics. You're assembling stuff on a factory floor, your people are locked at home, can you still deliver, and by when? We talked a bit earlier about cybersecurity and the resilience. There was a couple of months ago an electronic supplier that got hit by ransomware. That company was unable to deliver because they weren't able to have the goods received, they weren't unable to process the invoice. People were there, able to work. You need to raise this to the board of directors and say, how is this impacting your capability to deliver the end product because your supply chain has failed, albeit the reason is cyber.
Would also your, let's say, your customers expect, and from the defense industry, expect a certain amount of resiliency from
Yes,
Thales?
definitely. That's part of the, so typically at the European level, there's the NIS directive, Network Information Security Directive, that defines a number of vital sectors, which includes defense, it includes healthcare, it includes transportation. So there is an expectation on these type of companies to have a sustained effort, even though everything goes bad alongside this.
Yeah.
Sandra?
Yeah, it's not only the stakeholders, also the shareholders. We saw during our monitoring exercise of the listed companies over 2019 and 2020 that one of the main questions asked during the general assemblies was about resilience. So the shareholders were also very concerned about resilience capabilities put in place during the crisis. So it's coming from everywhere, indeed. Yeah.
John?
Well, yeah, I think that if you look at rating agencies, the questions they send to companies, resilience will become a bigger part of that. But also, if you are a service provider, your clients will ask for it much more than in the past, and that's also for cybersecurity, by the way. It's not only the resilience for a crisis.
To what extent is it, you were talking about working with other people in the same organization in terms of crisis. How can you make sure that that works better to create better resilience? Perhaps if you give some concrete examples of what you did at Philips, because you did mention it. So
yeah, absolutely. For example, we work on supplier risks. So we are an equipment manufacturer to a certain extent, but also solutions. But we of course have very important suppliers, sometimes single or sole sourced. And you like to approach a supplier risk from a holistic perspective. So you need all the inputs from the different domains to sketch a picture about a supplier risk. And then you can actually discuss, okay, should we mitigate a certain risk or not? Sometimes if you do not have the information that a supplier will be phased out, you can put a lot of effort in a certain supplier. But if it's phased out next year, we can also say, okay, we do accept the risk for the time being and focus on where the risk will go. And I think those types of insights we typically share now within the teams. And yeah, I think that's where resilience will take us.
You said holistic.
Yeah, so it's from a location risk, financial risk, regulatory risk. So different elements building up a risk perspective.
Do you identify with that at Thales?
Absolutely.
Or cyber as well, sorry, yeah.
Practice, practice, practice. That's the three keys to success, obviously. Because it puts you into the rhythm, it gets to know the people, share the common language. It's not when the crisis happens that you need to pause and explain why a particular computer seizure, forensics, whatever, takes forever, and why you can't get the answer within 2 hours to your board of directors. So that training makes the people know one another and enables everyone to have a complete view. And I agree with the holistic sense of this. Supply chain, the board of directors, audit, are all part of the same common vision that you need to have if you want to get through your next crisis.
Are you basically saying that the COVID has been a real sea change in the way that companies organize themselves to come up with more resilience? Is it the big kind of change that was needed? Or is it just part of dealing with a particular crisis like we've dealt with other crises?
Well, I think first it pushed the digital agenda. I think we all recognize that in our talks. And also it made the lines very short. So also with our board of management, they actually reach out. I'm the coordinator of the group crisis team. They reach out directly and the lines are very short. And I think that's also the way it should work. But as we are ending, let's say, the COVID crisis teams, we should then look ahead and prepare resiliency for what's coming at us.
I think it was like, I said already, a dry run, a wake-up call. I mean, and I think at several levels of the organization, and to come back to the holistic approach, to install this holistic approach, and also to move from the pure risk approach to a more strategic approach, and to really try, because we're talking a lot, of course it's the theme of today, talking a lot about risks, but we also need to see the opportunities that are there, and to get to this strategic vision to avoid these risks.
What kind of opportunities, though, and how can they be identified?
That's more when we're talking about energy crisis of ESG, there's a lot of opportunities to be identified, but the transition is there, and the challenges of the transition are tremendous, and there is a lot of risk, the risk of the stranded assets, etc. But we need to have the courage to develop new visions and to develop new strategies, I think. And I think there, unfortunately, COVID helped to become more resilient and to look at things differently, I think.
Do you agree with that? Because COVID has made us all much more aware of risk in our lives. I mean, we're all sitting here in a round table. This is the first time I've hosted a round table for a while, because the world has changed. It's a question of mindset, isn't it? Are you seeing that in the
yes, well, I think certainly, certainly on the crisis management angle, the maturity bar has been raised by COVID a lot. And for the opportunities, I think what was said already by Pim is the automation accelerated. If you think that the financial industry, the trading of stock and things was still done by faxes, and now had to move to other means. And that's the same for signatures. We couldn't put signatures on, so e-signing has been introduced quite fast. So all that kind of things, it's a good change, and it will change the operations for the future as well.
As a customer, I found that quite odd, because I've suddenly started signing things with an e-signature, and I've always wondered why I couldn't really do that before. I mean, the world is changing. For customers, it appears to have changed quite slowly, because I've always thought, well, why can't I just kind of sign things? Why are they not prepared to take that risk from me? Do you agree that this has been coming also from customers who have changed their expectations, and the world has changed for us all, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely, and I hope we also take some of the good things with us out of this crisis, so to say.
The good things being what? E-signatures?
Well, no, well, e-signature is just a process step, I would say, of something. But we travel less. So I think there are also good things to take out of this crisis. I think there's a balance between home workers and office work.
Good, what, in terms of personal life or in terms of the environment?
Personal life, I think efficiency, but we as a company also find it important that we invite people back into the offices when it can, when the markets are open again. So we aim to have 3 days a week people back into the office, to also spark creativity and interaction between people. We just spoke about people new with the company. They were working in isolation, I think, for most of the months. So it's also good to have these newcomers on board and then make them part of the teams again. But I think, yeah, certainly we should also take the learnings from COVID with us.
Yeah, but also if you think about the many department heads in companies that didn't believe in teleworking and how they had to all of a sudden and gained that trust during COVID, that's a game changer as well.
That is definitely a game changer, especially for large organizations when you're multinational, that shifts the mind of people to actually work with somebody distantly as opposed to being next to the person in the next meeting room or creativity room. Of course, flip side to that, we saw an increase, the numbers vary, of the cyber attacks during COVID, because they also enjoyed the fact that they could work from home and leverage whatever there was. And that's part of the resilience, to balance those benefits with the risk and vice versa.
Do you feel more comfortable now that you can deal with the cyber risks, or because you've had more experience of them during the pandemic, or not?
Confidence is always very difficult to grab. I think and if you ask a CISO where you feel comfortable, you always have that joke about the person that never goes to bed because there's always something happening. So I think we're never that very comfortable.
I didn't know that joke. Okay.
Yeah, sometimes we don't sleep much. But that joke aside, that enabled us, as we said, teleworking has increased the ICT capabilities for remote work quite significantly, pushed by the board of directors because you needed to continue operating. Likewise, you invested quite a lot in preventing whatever was coming. We saw a surge, and numbers vary about between a third and 4 times, depends from company to company, the number of attacks or malicious scans against our companies. And we endured. So the goal of resilience is reached.
So it could be a good thing, Sandra, in that companies are coming to terms with the risks, the cyber risks, but the questions have been posed much more seriously during COVID. So perhaps that could be a way of getting more resilience in that field.
You can repeat the question? I'm afraid I didn't get it entirely.
The advantage of COVID is that people have come to terms with the real risk of cybersecurity in a way that they weren't before because we've all been working a lot more online.
Yeah, might be because they were obliged to do so. So I don't know if it's really the risk of cybersecurity. I think it's just changing habits is sometimes very difficult for people, and I think that's one of the big challenges of the transition. We don't have enough courage to get out of our comfort zone, and in some way, COVID pushed us out of our comfort zone, and that's why a lot of changes are there to stay, and that's the positive thing of a very dramatic event. Yes.
Last question from me, and then I'll come to the floor. What role do you think that culture can play in building resilience? Do we have different attitudes towards resilience in different cultures? Because we're all here as Europeans, and yet we're all very different. The thing that we all know when we do European meetings is that when you actually get down to it, we have very different attitudes in each, even in our own countries. I live in France, and the attitude is very different between the north and the south. Do you think culture plays a role in this, John?
Well, I'm not sure that I can say something sensible for a European. I'm Dutch and I work in Belgium, and I don't think there's a lot of difference. But Pim should maybe tell about that. But I think also it depends maybe on the industry. In the financial industry, resilience has always been a very important topic because it's a kind of a systemic industry. So I think it proved to be well prepared in that industry at least. Culture in a crisis, for me, is more like our people being very formal and sticking to their governance roles as they have, because a lot of organizations are quite complex, and you cannot need that in a crisis. You need to be smart and pragmatic.
On the culture thing, Stefan?
Yeah, I'll avoid the controversy. I don't know. I've been nurtured too much by your own shows earlier in my early age, so I believe I have too much Anglo-Saxon culture. But to avoid the controversy within Europe, I think there's a big difference between the US culture and the European culture. The US is very driven by compliance. There is a lot of tick the box and you'll be compliant, and that will ensure resilience. Whereas I think, and that's a good thing, our commonality in Europe is about risk. Ultimately, and that's what I firmly believe in terms of information security, it's not so much the information security that you will improve and I'll add this godforsaken encryption stuff to protect the information. It's rather the overall systemic value. If I want to protect intellectual property for the company and it's locked in a particular closet somewhere, I might be better off with putting locks at the door rather than investing into the encryption software. Vice versa, if I'm global, I probably will undervalue the lock on the door and more on the encryption. And I think that cultural difference is something that we need to work on, because there is a number of regulations that are coming, and from the US typically, particularly in the defense sector, the CMMC, the Cyber Maturity Model Certification, is very much about defining maturity on the basis of a scale of compliance items. I think risk is great, because risk, you can take risks. To quote Ray Kroc, you don't go with an enterprise if you don't want to take risks. And the resilience is out of what risks you want to accept and what risks you want to tackle and the ones that you want to get insured.
Right. And you also think that the US approach is more a tick of the box than the European approach,
very
where
much so.
You would more look at the resiliency itself. Yeah.
I agree with Stefan when we're talking about corporate resilience, but maybe not if we're talking about individual resilience, because in Europe, our comfort zone, our wellness, our welfare system being bigger, our comfort zone also is bigger, so it's more difficult to get out of it. But then that's my personal opinion. It's not a political opinion or something. But I think we need to make the difference between corporate resilience and individual resilience when we compare to the United States.
Right, let's see if there's any questions from here. You're watching us, most of you live. We do have some people in the audience. It would be great if you could, well, Charlotte, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you very much, Charlotte, and I'm a member of the board in FERMA. Very interesting to hear your views on resilience. And I would like to know if you can give any recommendations to companies. How do you make sure that resilience now become part of the strategy process in the companies moving forward?
So I think it's very important to take a look at the board of directors and to have a board of directors with a composition that is adapted to the strategy of the company. So what we noticed during the COVID crisis, that there was in boards, there were two sides. There were the people that had the courage and the vision to change things, and then the people, and you notice this in every crisis within boards, the people that have fear and that don't want to change and don't want to adapt. So I think one of the lessons learned is really look at the diversity of your board and have a board that is composed by people that are from different expertises, but also have the skills and the capabilities to deal with resilience, and they can put this culture and this leadership throughout the whole company. So I think that's one very important lesson learned from the COVID crisis.
Can I ask you, you must be fed up with this question, but it's actually a real question because I host things, and over the last 3 or 4 months I've had a lot of invitations to host things about women. Has the attitude of, has the COVID changed in a way the attitude towards women in leadership roles, or not at all?
I don't know. In fact, I don't know. I mean,
you must be fed up with getting asked questions like this, but
I didn't really notice that. I mean, I think that COVID has changed the attitude towards diversity, and diversity is much more than only gender. It's especially diversity of age and diversity of background. I think that is important, maybe even more important than diversity of gender, and there we're not there yet. We still have a lot of work to do in that aspect. And as the diversity of gender is concerned, almost all our listed companies are compliant today. So I mean, there is a lot of work that has been done already before COVID. This was already the situation in 2019. So I don't really see a special effect of the COVID crisis, but I see an effect on the debate on diversity and inclusion. And so I think that's important.
It's true, I hosted a pharmaceutical company only last week, and a whole day was about diversity. It was the only subject. Yeah. Is that something that Philip's become more diverse because of COVID?
No, I think we are a diverse company by nature. We are very inclusive. Yeah, we would have to look at our annual report, of course, to get all the figures. But that's the one thing I always liked about us, that we have a diverse company with people from all of the regions, and yeah, very welcoming. So, yeah.
John?
Well, I would like to go back to that question, because I was a little bit surprised by the question. Because if a board is there for long-term value creation and it does a kind of SWOT analysis, then how can it not have resilience, have very high up that agenda? So, and if they would not have, I think risk managers and auditors have a real role to kind of smash it in their faces, right?
Okay, I think we have a few more questions. Yes, if you could introduce yourself.
Tapio Huovinen, member of the FERMA board and the Sustainability Working Group. So how do you fit the sustainability into this resilience now? Another very important topic.
So after diversity, we do the sustainability. So how do you fit sustainability into this?
Yeah, for us, sustainability is high on the company agenda. So we closely work with them together as part of the resiliency platform. But sustainability is such a broad topic that you would always have to slice it into the energy part, the biodiversity part, But these are topics which are on our agenda, and yeah, we like actually them as a next step in our resilience platform to take on board that domain, so they can also benefit from the information we have and they share on the platform. But it's a growing topic, and if you look at our company, it's high on our company agenda. So it's a very valid question. I really like to have these guys on board working in our platform. At the moment, they participate as a consumer almost, so they take data from our platform. But we really like them to be engaged with us on that. Yeah.
But we've all become invested with it, haven't we? I mean, we all now even kind of like care. I was on the train yesterday. I was very concerned about not having plastic cups and so forth. Everybody's like thinking about it now. So in Thales,
I think, yeah, we're investing big as a market. The number of innovations, typically building your next credit card out of recycled materials, etc. And to come back to what Pim said, indeed, that's part of the top two concerns, along with cyber. And I think you might contradict me, but I think that's the top two items for many boards as it stands, the long-term sustainability, eco-friendly approach, as well as cybersecurity. They obviously have been growing. There has been a wake-up call into those two items, and they're there to stay. Linking the two will be very difficult. With we talked about travel and compensating for CO2 in our travels by airways, by rail, by car. How do we link that with the increase of the digital economy? Because the data center is not carbon neutral either. So I think it will be difficult to link the two, but obviously those two topics will go hand in hand for quite some time.
we all talk a lot more about sustainability. Do we actually do it? And is there a danger now we're coming out of COVID that we're all going to go back into traveling again? I mean, we are here, and that it's made people talk a lot about sustainability, but are we actually going to become more sustainable?
We have to. There's 9 years left to make the transition, so we will have to be more sustainable, and there is no sustainability without resilience. And as Stefan mentioned, it is it should be the first item on the agenda of boards, because it's also their duty. It's in the corporate governance codes today, sustainable value creation is the first duty of boards of directors. So it's very important, and they won't make it without resilience. So.
Yeah, and I think it should also be number one on the agenda for the risk managers and the auditors, because we have to adapt to the developments. But what is really important, and I know the EU is also working on that, is to make sure what do we mean by ESG and climate and all these. They are container words, and now we're all making our own definitions, but we need to settle them and then make sure there are some standards in place.
What kind of definitions are you seeing that are divergent?
Well, I think sustainability in the whole ESG area has so many aspects that you need to make sure what it is, and then have at least some principles there, because then boards can create a level playing field, and we can start risk managing it, and we can start auditing it, and we can start reporting on it. But if we all use different language, it doesn't make any sense, and the comparison will be gone.
There's a very easy definition of sustainability. It's responding to the needs of today without endangering the needs of the future. So, and starting from that, I think we can answer a lot of questions. And then at the European level, we see today an evolution from a duty, what we call a duty to disclose. There was reporting conditions and reporting obligations, to a duty to act. And I think the taxonomy has already brought a lot of more clarity to what is expected from companies. Of course, it stays a very vast domain, and there's still a lot of work to be done. And then everything cannot be done by companies either. There's also authorities that should live up to the ambitions.
Okay, I'll take one or two more questions. Yes, we have another question. If you could remind us who you are.
Yes, hello. So Laurent Nioul, I'm a FERMA board member and the risk and insurance manager for ArcelorMittal, the steel company. First of all, I would like to thank the panel because that was a very interesting discussion. What I would, take out of that discussion, I believe, are two main things. The first one is diversity. You know, resilience is really about complexity and multiple areas in a company. You know, from geographies to culture to operation. I mean, it's really a complex topic. And the second item is that I have heard a lot of time that we need a common language. You know, we need to talk the same language. So I would say that you need a kind of translator or someone internally that could drive the translation of all this different information and data into something meaningful for the board, which was also said to be, of course, a key driver. So my question would be really practical. And you know, our members at FERMA are risk managers. So what would be your recommendation for risk managers in company to get that position, to be able to be in the driving seat for that process, and to be sure they don't miss that opportunity for our profession?
Pim?
Yeah, I think the answer is collaboration. So you need to reach out to your other domains, look what the common ground is in terms of data, stakeholders that you influence, and then take it from there. So I'm really happy we started that process in 2018 with the single platform. You can debate if that's the golden nugget, but at least we talk the same language, we have the same data feeds, we get the same threat information, we get all the crisis teams working on the platform as well as part of the COVID learning. So by speaking a single language across domains also allows you to network if you discuss what are the projections for the next couple of years, where do we like to take the platform to. So I think this is the time of data which should support you in your collaboration, I think, discussions internally. And yeah, so I'm a big fan of collaboration. I'm also passionate about it. And I think the only way we can make a breakthrough success with our functions is really to team up on resiliency.
Stefan?
Yeah, the saying goes, every feedback is a gift. Instead of just leveraging the data we've got, which is great, I value the feedback that I got from a board member that say, you're always coming and expressing what the problem is or what the crisis is about. Can you not tell me regularly how it works, what you do right, so that we can leverage this on? And that shifted several years ago, that shifted my way of thinking about how you engage with the board. The whole purpose is making it normal so that you have the language that comes over, and you get the feedback that says, well, you talked about this particular topic, can you elaborate a bit more on this one next? And I think iteratively, from those requests from the board, you can adjust where you want to go. And I've had the pleasure of getting this kind of feedback saying, well, that piece of information was invaluable for us in the next cycle. Can you do this more often and more deep dive? And I think that's how you can get the meaningful relationship with the board.
Okay, would you like to take that?
Yeah, maybe one, because I also believe a lot in collaboration between all the lines, but I think if any, then the risk manager is most suited to facilitate the discussion with management, to create that same language and a level playing field within the company.
Okay, right, let's go to another question. If you could introduce yourself.
Good morning, my name is Carl Lehman, I'm a board member of Belrim. I have a question for the boards, generally speaking. How do you avoid that sustainability becomes greenwashing?
Huge question. We all do greenwashing. It's what I was saying before. It's like we talk about it, but we're actually doing it anymore just because we're all talking about it or appearing to take environmentally friendly measures. How does Thales avoid greenwashing? I'm not saying you do it, but how if you did it, would you avoid?
I think that's probably my personal bias as well. And Thales is an engineering company. There's a lot of engineers there, so we tend to think in engineering you need the data. So the first item that you need to go and to avoid greenwashing is to look at what you really are doing and whether it does add up in terms of what comes out. To avoid the effect of I'll add this or that because it looks greener for whatever purpose. And I think we talked earlier about a holistic view. I think that is also the core item, looking at the overall landscape and evaluating fairly how you contribute or not to sustainability. And in the end, what comes out comes out. But I do believe, and that was one of your questions earlier as well, is this here to stay? Yes, I think some of those changes are permanent and they're for the greater good. I did like my plastic straws, but I like my paper straws just as much.
Greenwashing.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and there's no easy answer to it. But I think the most important thing is that you really to have it embedded in the strategy. So it should not be, and there I agree with Stefan. It should not be just some aspects of the operations that become more sustainable, but you should really reflect on the strategy and really develop a strategy that aims at sustainability. So it's easier said than done, of course, and it starts with the board, and it starts with reflection, and it starts with expertise and people. So it's really a big exercise to go through.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit the same with also other parts of non-financial information, where the standards are maybe not so strict. And so we need to have some standards, some principles, and we need to monitor and audit it to make sure that reporting is reliable and transparent, because otherwise society will have Hollywood reports on it.
Excess is never a good thing either. Greenwashing creates an imbalance into the wrong side of things. You may ultimately end up in slowing down your innovations for whatever purpose, and that will probably prevent the next innovation that will rock your world, change your game altogether, and that's probably also something to think about.
We see the shift already in the regulation that is coming to us. As I said before the focus really was on reporting and disclosure, and now the focus will be more and more on acting. What is the company doing to make the difference? Not only what is it telling about it, but what is it really doing? So I think the move is going on.
Maybe I'm getting older, but the more FERMA things I do, it's true that you do notice that there's younger people, so it's a generational thing as well, isn't it? I mean, it's a bit of a cliche, but it's also true that the more younger people get involved in risk management, the more green issues are going to become very important. Or is that just a cliche?
Well,
John?
I'm 60 years old, and I think I feel that it is important as my 30-year son, so I'm not sure.
Any other final questions here from the floor? Yes, another question here.
So, could you summarize the key obstacle to avoid obstacle to be managed in order to increase the impact of the risk manager, certainly for resilience? So, what can we do to increase the impact of the risk manager in the framework of the resilience?
What are the obstacles and what are the steps that can be taken?
I can be creative. I can shed an idea that we're currently pursuing with other companies, which is, we talked a bit about the COVID was something that was not necessarily unpredictable, but certainly not as expected, as big as it is. So what we're trying to do is to look at those black swans and identify what small steps you can do early on to support the resilience. So what small value added before you can do in order to lessen the impact when the black swans come. A typical example, just to make it concrete, is that Titanic sunk because it was thought to be unsinkable. So if anybody had actually looked at this in the first place in saying, okay, we designed it to be unsinkable, let's think about the unthinkable and assume that it goes sinking, what does happen? That's the kind of thinking that we do with the risk managers in the company, doing financial expectations about how can we change little things beforehand so that when the black swan comes, the impact is smaller. So that's a bit shaking the normal thinking, but that's a way of trying to address the ultimate obstacle of you didn't see that coming, and are we resilient?
Obviously can't see everything coming, but any word on the obstacles to answer that question?
Well, I think if risk management wants to have more emphasis on resilience, I think teaming up is the answer, the collaboration, because teaming up with internal audit, but also with compliance, with supply chain, and even with HR, that's the solution to bring the topic and make it more important.
Okay, I don't know if we have any more questions here from the floor. Yes, we do have another question over there. If we could hand over the microphone.
A little statement that in a recent study I read from Eurasia, there seems to be a big difference between, and I think you mentioned it earlier, between age, and you talk a lot about diversity, gender diversity, but not that much about age, and there seems to be a big difference in how the younger people, and then we mean below 25, look at certain things, and their priority seems to be completely different than the older generations. And companies will be judged by the younger generations, and younger generations will decide on how a company behaves in order to work for that company. And that goes back to the battle on talent. So I think age is very underestimated today in companies on how important it is. Secondly, on contingency plans, what I learned is that everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And that's what a company needs to be, and you need to be agile. I think the word hasn't fallen, but remaining agile and making quick decisions, very short decision lines. And you see sometimes in large companies it's a bit difficult to take quickly decisions to change things.
Yeah, maybe I should first adjust my joke about my age, because I wasn't implying that it was not important. Because we all know that young people now basically select the companies to work for also with sustainability in their minds. So that's another reason for a company to take it very serious.
I think the creativity is also important. What young people bring to the mix is they have other ideas, new ideas. The aerospace engineer that I am, I'd like to quote a number of things in safety in aerospace. Every incident, there is a lessons learned, and it gets fed back into the normal way of doing business. If you look at the way some pilots, when they received a missile upon taking off in the Middle East, they managed to steer the aircraft using the engines, because they lost everything else basically, and they could land. And that lessons learned was integrated into an alternate way of landing your aircraft should this fail. And it gets trained into the pilots. And this creative idea, again, gets feedback. So we need to leverage the new thinking of new people that come with a different angle, a different view on things. And that question of age is really a matter of culture, I think, for them, because I'm now past that age as well. For them, it is built in their mindset that they need to be sustainable in the long run. They will get a bit of teleworking as part of their daily work. They will need to get Facebook, even if it stops for 7 hours or whatever other thing, as part of their daily life, and we need to inject that into our normal way of thinking.
I think also interesting remark about the contingency plans and what's the use if you have a response which is very different. And I tend to disagree a little bit, because contingency planning allows you with a group to collaborate, to think through some scenarios. Of course, it will never happen 100% to what scenario you thought of, but at least it gives you a start to think with colleagues about potential scenarios. And then, of course, you have crisis teams who then intervene if there is a crisis going on or an issue which may pop up or snowball into an issue. So I think still the contingency plans are very valid and also valuable. And yeah, as a group, you should also push new scenarios into your organization. So we had the first wave of COVID, but there was certainly, thinking, how about if we have multiple waves of COVID? So we push it actively towards our business continuity plans and have the teams think of, how do we deal with the COVID if it's there for a longer time? And I think, that also stimulates collaboration again.
So crisis, it's the kind of typical Chinese thing that crisis is good and bad at the same time. I'm not saying COVID's good, obviously, but I mean, the fact that people have had to ask questions they weren't expecting has helped resilience. Is that what you're saying? A final sentence maybe from all of you of how can we collaborate better for resilience? Sandra, just a conclusion.
We have to be courageous and come out of our comfort zone and work together.
John?
Yeah, I think being pragmatic and not have brick walls between the lines of defense.
It's all about teamwork. A single word, not too bad.
Yeah, teamwork, collaboration, and data-driven. I think that's a big element these days as well.
Well, thank you very much for having brought these strands, these threads together that we've been talking about in this roundtable. Thank you very much to our studio live here in Brussels, and also for you who are watching us. It'll be a pleasure to see you again at 2 o'clock Central European time for a face-to-face interview with Minister Koritnik from the Slovenian presidency of the Council of the European Union, and we'll be following that with a round-table discussion about what's on the European agenda for a digital, and you'll be very happy, green recovery from what we've all been going through. But thank you very much indeed to all our panelists this morning and to all of you who've come physically here, and of course to you who are watching us wherever you are, presumably in Europe or around the world. Thank you very much, and see you again in about 2 hours' time. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.